Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and today we are talking to my new friend, Y. Well, his formal name is Yogi Guyadin, but he goes by Y, and don't worry, he'll explain why in this conversation. I love so many pieces of this conversation. I've actually had to record the intro opening thing here a couple of times because it's hard to really encompass all the great things that Y talks about in this conversation. Y is an educator, an innovator, an entrepreneur, a musician, an inspiration, so many things. And so listening to this episode again, it reminds me that there are so many things that we can do to reteach fundamentals and not get bored or stuck in our ruts. But at the same time, Y encourages us because we are one of one. And I love to tell people you're the only you there is. And he has said it so succinctly. And this episode is such a great sharing of his story, his creative ideas, and y'all, he talks in the best analogies. I hope that if you like this episode and other episodes like it, that you'll jump over to patreon.com/musicedmatters. All of the fees over there go to support the podcast, how we share, the little gifts we send the speakers when they come on the show. And really that community means so much. That's patreon.com/musicedmatters. And that's what keeps the podcast afloat right now. So if you can take a second and jump over there. The other thing, super helpful before we actually hear why inspire you to do great things. Make sure you like and review the podcast. That's how people all over the world get to hear it. So I appreciate your time. I'm so thankful that you're listening. And without further ado, let's talk about creative expressions and why not show love with my new friend, Y. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are talking to Yogi Guyadin, better known as Y. Hello, my new friend.
Peace. Honored to be here, Emily. Appreciate you.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I first heard about you via the contact page on my website and went down a rabbit hole because why? You do the coolest stuff.
Wow. Thank you so much. It means a lot to hear it being referred to that way. I'm deep in the rabbit hole, so it's my life's purpose, but to see it being reflected and reciprocated means a lot to me. So I appreciate this.
I can't wait to get the listeners more information on community building and expression and just everything that you're doing. I love that you call it Artivism, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yeah. I know that this is new still. We have a couple warm-up questions.
Yes.
First of all, what is your name?
Yep. Well, my given name is Yogi, 4-letter name. Last name is Guyadin. I had to shorten it to a 1-letter Y, which I stylized with a capital Y and a lowercase question mark, representing that I do not know. Always a student. My favorite quote in life is "I don't know," and I like it to be monosyllabic. So saying my name takes the least amount of effort possible. So the science behind it. Yeah.
I like the whole explanation. And why? Where do you live?
Yeah, I'm from a small town called Queens, New York City. You know, I know we say small for New York. We're like the more spacious of the boroughs of the 5. Shout out to Staten Island, which is more there, but I'm from Queens, New York, particularly Jamaica and southeastern Queens, not too far from the airport. If you fly into JFK, that's where I manifested and when the spaceship landed.
I love it. I'm flying through JFK tomorrow, actually, so I will wave during my layover.
Come through, and then we'll find a place
awesome.
for you.
Hey, random factoid. I did a adventure run through the middle of the night. Have you ever seen the Warriors movie?
Yeah.
Which is the story of like the
classic.
Super classic. Like it's an amazing movie. Everyone should watch it. And the film score is the bomb.
Yes, like, that so movie. Good. Whoa, Emily, so you're in New York. We're gonna have to link up when you're down here.
So I did a run over the summer from the Bronx all the way out to Coney Island in the middle of the night, dressed up like characters from the movie. And I love those neighborhoods so much more now that I have traversed them on foot in costume.
On foot? Yeah. Oh, man. You went from the uptown. Those are two legendary neighborhoods. Wow.
And we went over the Brooklyn Bridge right as the sun was coming up. It was so cool. It was really cool. I love your part of the country. Anyway, sorry, I got digressed. So you live in New York. And what is it that you do? Why?
Yeah, so it took me a long time, over 10 years, to come up with these two words that describe what I do. I describe what I am and do as an interdisciplinary artivist, which is a very unique terminology. But I started out, doing writing, poetry, and then it evolved into music, audio recording. A lot of us, we go down the rabbit hole of creativity, but I saw that these disciplines feed each other. It's that interdisciplinary where, like, one mode feeds another. So then after I, got into audio recording, I started playing. I had some great jazz mentors out here in New York that showed me a lot. Got into even theater from studying things like theater of the oppressed and those things. And through teaching and arts education, I always had to become a student again. So interdisciplinary artivist is what I say. And artivist is a hybrid word between activist and artist. And for me, my activism means activating our organisms to our highest potential and using our creativity for something beyond self. So for me, that's where the education came in. That's where the volunteer work came in. And then that actually ended up leading me to creating the company that I started now 10 years ago called Creative Expressions.
I love this. There is so much to talk about here before we go to our last warm-up question. So we're going to push pause on those warm-up questions.
Yeah.
I have a really nosy question. Did you do music and theater and creativity stuff in school growing up in New York?
So this is my journey. I was not a good student. I was highly, I should say this. I learn in a very different way. Shout out to Gardner's 9 Types of Intelligence that really helped me understand different learning modalities. And I realized I have a very almost synesthesia kind of energy with what I did. So I could pay attention to certain things, but I'm not the artist who's going to draw the photograph like the photograph. I'm going to make the banana blue. I'm going to make the apple orange. I'm going to do certain things with it. And that's kind of how I found my Kung Fu style. So education wise, I was exposed to certain things just culturally growing up in Jamaica, Queens, family's West Indian background. So I always like to say that my education started within that, being the child of immigrants. I'm also a middle child. So these are all things that I think informed me. I have a younger sister and an older brother. So my younger sister always hipped me to certain things as, the girl in the family. And then my brother was a lot more studious, by the book, academic person. And I was kind of like that black sheep in the middle that found my education. And then, after I finished school, had some trouble, went through dropping out and all that stuff, rebellious teenage stuff. I ended up going to an audio school. So I studied the audio engineering, and then I did an internship at Electric Lady Studios, the once famed home of Jimi Hendrix. And that's where a lot of my education came up. And I got to work with some real professionals in music. And then through that, I hosted my own open mics and venues. And then a school teacher came in New York. We lost a lot of our music programs. She would ask me to come in and develop those music programs within community centers and facilities. And that's how I got my feet wet. And through having to take what I did and teach that to other younger people, that was also a big part of my education. So I consider that all part of it. I tried to go back to school for performance and composition, but when I learned a lot of it through the mentorship, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get this information more quickly by doing it versus through some of the school structures, because the schools I went to didn't have strong music and arts programs. So I had to kind of find that outside of school, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. And it's such a great example of not following the yardstick or the ruler or the set path that everybody follows. And it's so fun. Every person we have on the podcast has a different story of how they got into the field. And it's never a right or wrong way. It's just the way you found. And I love how your way totally encompasses your interdisciplinary approach to everything.
One leads to the other. Yeah.
So you've gotten you went to the schooling at this audio design place. You had opportunities to design and build teaching and curriculum at community centers. How did you get into creative expressions, and what's the last question, that matters to you today?
Yes, that's a beautiful question. Thank you so much. So after I started volunteering, I learned a little bit more about the nonprofit world through grant writing and fundraising, which also helped me understand a lot of it. And then through working with more trained music educators like yourself and arts educators, they were just like, yo, your brain, we need to translate this into a curriculum. So they the next step was, after I succeeded as a teaching artist for several years and being in New York, I freelanced with various arts education organizations. And what happened was, like any of us, right? I'm sure it happened to you while you make this very podcast. My ideas could never fit inside of these other organizations. I always felt like I had a gallon of, metaphorically, of offerings, and the containers were always like a cup, or might get lucky and get a half gallon or a quart. But I always found myself like trying to bring my ideas into these things, because a lot of my ideas do come from my imagination, just like music. And I stopped following so many things. And after a while, and I started making money. It was actually a funny story I'll tell you, where I started freelancing. So the way it works over here, I was an independent contractor. I was young. I didn't really know about taxes and how it worked. But when I crossed the financial threshold, because I was just getting so much work as an individual, the IRS wrote me a love letter. That's what I call it.
No
And they were
way.
like, you owe us back taxes for 5 years. Now I'm a musician living in New York City. So I was like, I don't have 10 grand to pay you guys, you know? So my heart started beating fast, and I was like, I need to go and talk to an accountant. At the time, my cousin Jessica was in school for accounting, and she was studying it. And she said, why? You need to start a company. You've now crossed over. This is all connected to your social. She was like, you got to start a business and start writing off these things. This is the way. And she's like, don't worry, in a year, we'll take care of it. So I got this crazy bill. All my money was spent because I'm just living in New York, and it's all gone. So I'm like, and I left school so I wouldn't go in debt. So like, no, they got me. And what she told me, she kind of guided me, thank you to Jessica. She was like, create an entity, think about what your mission is. And because I had to write those things, it made me assess. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And then, that was the origin story of Creative Expressions. It was a reaction to actually succeeding in a certain level that I didn't expect happen. Getting this letter, because as freelancers, we pay all our taxes. So they waited for me. Shout out to the government. They waited a couple years. They hit me with that letter. And then I created the entity out of necessity. And then from there, I started thinking, well, let me bring in my other musician homies. Now that I've written curriculum, I can train them in the curriculum. I can't be at all these sites at once. And then I would provide the arts organizations with, other teaching staff when I couldn't get the gig. But when they were like, why? We want you. We don't want somebody else. I had to identify what it was that I was doing on a pedagogical aspect and a curriculum aspect that was making my kung fu, as I call it, different than other educators. So that's when I really got into like studying things like Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Augusto Boal, Theater of the Oppressed. And then I saw that there was this whole framework that was really rooted in the arts as a tool for liberation, and hence, the Artivism and that. So that's kind of like the basis of it.
So it all started out of necessity. So you were doing you, exploring the creative. I love how you said the ideas just came from your imagination.
Yeah,
Because so
for sure.
often, especially as educators, we forget that we're creatives first. And that's such a great reminder. And as you sat down, I love you gave us a tip right there. People listening, maybe step one for you is just sitting down and articulating what it is that means something to you, because you articulated it into creative expressions.
Yeah.
And that's where you moved from just musician freelancer, from modern musician, into education reform, and now
for sure.
creativity and mental health. So can we talk about Cypher Based Pedagogy?
Yeah. So once again, as I've gotten the honor to work with people like yourself that are on the highest levels of education, and when I started then transitioning from working with young folk to formally trained educators within the college and university level, as well as middle school and high school teachers, I had to kind of learn some language. So I took a lot of preemptive education courses. I studied a little bit more of the formal side of like understanding lesson planning, pedagogy, and curriculum, because it was a learning curve for me that came and did it so organic. But I had some great mentors, femtors as well. Shout out to Martha Diaz. She was part of the NYU Gallatin program, and she was about education reform, particularly in music and arts, because sometimes the curriculums that they give music teachers are literally from the 1800s. And she was like, "Why, you should really be helping these teachers." And what really, really put structural fire under me was I realized if I could help one teacher that's got 5 classes, I can then scale the impact, right? So my goal became creating these methods, and I'm always a student. So what the teachers and the formal educators would tell me is like their challenges. Oh, we don't have equipment in this school, or hey, we're dealing with these multiple interests from students. They don't want to just do choir, just do a artistic segregation, I called it. Keyboard class, right? So the Cypher is based on an original, I believe it might be Arabic word called Cypher, which is a circular form. And the Cypher also means it's like a non-hierarchical learning where everyone can be a student and teacher. So whether you're that jazz musician that played 50 years and you're straight there, or you're a brand new student into it and your first time humming a melody, there is a form that, I quote Paulo for this. It doesn't follow a banking model or top-down education. It is more of a circular learning. A lot of the roots that I paid homage to as a native New Yorker was in the early foundation of hip hop culture, where you had dance, the graffiti, the DJ, these elements that would once again be interdisciplinary. And because at that time in the 70s in New York City, a lot of the traditional music education was removed from the school. It used to be part of the curriculum and it was taken out. But what happens is the community always came up with the answer. They were like, we're going to do these park jams. We're going to do these jam sessions. We're going to turn a community center out and bring the percussion and bring in our, whether it's Puerto Rican ancestry from that, or it was, my background's West Indies, the calypso and that, and all this fusion would happen in these ciphers. And it was a really, really powerful experience. So when I understood that a circular model would be better than a top-down model, once again, from reading books like The Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Garner's 9 Types of Intelligence, I realized that it needs to be both a two-way street between whoever the participants are and the facilitator is, which is why I refer to myself more as a facilitator than an educator, because facile is the Latin root word, which means to make something easy. So whether I'm teaching counting measures in 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, you can make something simple and relatable and also kinesthetic, linguistic, auditory, spatial. So I started using these different elements from learning teaching modalities. And then once again, I will always credit my earlier students. They were the ones who ended up teaching me so much on anything. So that's how I was able to do it. And then the learning method, once I learned the word pedagogy, I said, okay, the main thing that I'm doing is I'm helping people unlearn and create environments that are cohesive for both the participant and student, for students to become teachers and teachers to become students. So it was almost that was the fundamental behind that way of thinking.
I love it. So we're envisioning the circle. It's a both and, not a top-down bank model. And I have a few follow-up questions.
Yeah, sure.
You said a lot about like teaching complex rhythms and using different types of styles. I love that you talked about the history of hip hop, as I'm teaching history of rock and roll, and I always do a unit on hip hop. And it's so cool to go back and listen to the collaborative efforts that were part of it and to see how those collaborative efforts have changed today. But that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. How do you set up this teaching system? Like, what are some of the tools that you provide? What can some of the listeners take away from what you've learned in this circle model, this Cypher-based pedagogy, and apply to their classrooms tomorrow?
Got it. So shout out to my fellow educators like you. I learned a couple key terms. One was social and emotional learning, SELs. So one, I really, really saw that teachers would tell me across the board, confidence. They were like, well, we're teaching the method, they're getting it, but they're getting really shy on the microphone. And when they're playing their tune, they're so nervous to make a mistake, right? And then, with voice, right? Once you tighten up and that tension, and music is tension and release, right? You will squeeze out that note, maybe not, whoa, right? When you release that, you will feel that energy. So a lot of my work became looking at social and emotional learning. And the other thing I do is I tell all sites, all places that we are doing participant-led learning or student-led learning. So what I do is I assess in the beginning. So I'll come up with games. A lot of it is physical. So I use a lot of theater games, icebreakers and warm-ups. And I also implement things like Google Forms and surveys so students can actually say maybe they learned piano in the church by ear really well, or their uncle was a guitarist and they picked up something. So they have these skills that a lot of times we take for granted. So in the beginning, before I say, this is the curriculum, this is the program, and this is what we're going to do, you're going to learn this, this, and this, And we'd be like, well, hey guys, what skills do you have? What are you interested in learning? What are the resources that the site has? So if they're like, we have a computer lab or we have a couple keyboards or guitars, I build everything around the situation. And then I'm like, what are our goals? Well, we want to build confidence. We want to gear the students toward a performance at the end of the semester. I would look at what the deliverables were for the site, and I just call it a win-win-win. A win for the students, a win for the organization, and also a win for the educator and facilitator that's coming in. So once you get that, that's like it makes a chord almost, you add those three notes together to make a chord, and then from that chord you can make a chord progression. So I always like to explain everything in terms of music and rhythm, and then that allowed me to really just break some of the mold, but then also honor some of the challenges that our teachers are facing today. So it was a lot of listening. I always say we're anatomically, most of us are created with 2 ears and one of these, so we got to listen twice as much. We got to do, as they say in carpentry, you measure twice and cut once. So really listen to the students, really listen to what they have, and build based around them, which I was surprised was as revolutionary as it is, but me not coming from academia, I was able to kind of bring that in and then help these teachers that really cared. And, they want to see the results.
Listening is such a good reminder. Listening to what you just said, I think I created a step-by-step model. This is not a top-down approach. It is very, very circular. It must continue all the time. There is some type of assessment. There's some type of collaborative build, because you talked about the build is not just what you got from the assessment, but it's also the goals and the needs of the location. And then the listen, and you repeat that circle. So assess, build, and listen. And you keep building. And when you have those pieces, it makes sense. So for example, if someone is listening to this about to walk into their middle school classroom today, step one, you might use a Google form. You might use a fun theater game. Where do you find all your fun little icebreaker games? Do you make them up from your head too?
So once again, I'm always, in hip hop, we call it sampling. I'm always looking at things to get inspired by. So like, for example, in Puerto Rican, also known as Borinquen, the original island, they have a style of drum called a bomba. And it's where the dancer leads the groove instead of the musician leading the groove. So if the dancer goes bump, 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 the drum will react to the dance. And, I would come up with these games like 2 bars and pass, 2 bars and pass, 2 bars and pass, 2 bars and pass, make a cipher last. And the student, instead of just starting them out with like the quarter notes, the whole notes, the rhythm tree that, I used to actually teach first, I would just get them to organically do stomp, clap. And then, I would set a little tempo in there. And then if a student goes, I don't want to do this, I'm like, oh, that works. I don't want to do this. I don't. And they would be like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you did 2 bars. That was it. And then they would be like, they automatically think they had to like sing the greatest note or play the most. And I'm like, no, it's just about understanding the form, right? Like I equate it to martial arts. Any black belt will tell you they master and practice white belt moves. So a lot of fundamental teaching and reinforcing fundamentals. And once again, teaching the same thing in different modalities. So like if you're going to express something, use auditory learning, use visual learning for the person who might want to see the 4 quarter notes in the bar. Use everything you can and teach one thing in as many ways as possible instead of just one thing in one way, because then maybe a certain percentage of the students will get. And then that's what the teachers gave me a lot of credit for. They'd be like, why? We were never able to get this progress. How did you do it? I said, well, I broke down the same lesson, whether it was counting measures or bars, in an auditory way. I did it in a visual way. I did it in a kinesthetic way. And I did it in a spatial way with us physically representing each other in the room. So I took one thing and I made it several ways, which is something I really collected from theater, particularly Theater of the Oppressed. Another reference I can give people is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. They have a method called PAR, which is participatory action-based research. And you can find a lot of work on this if you just Google PAR. And then what that does is, once again, come with an idea, execute the idea, evaluate it, and revise. So you can make your students part of this creative process. So once again, I would come in and learn some games from other methods, some things from students. They would show me, oh, this is what we did in our church. This is what we did in our, community, or this is what I did in my culture when we sing songs on the holidays. And I would be like, okay, let's implement that in, and just constantly learning and evolving. And then I will take it and put my own spin on it,
I love that participatory piece because so often, for example, in rehearsals, you can just get bogged down on notes and rhythms and phrasing and musicality, but how do they want it to be? And when you say that participatory and assessment
Yeah.
and redo, you can teach the same thing a whole bunch of times. I love that really tangible, really usable piece of information. Now, I'm wondering,
Yeah.
this whole creative expressions, do you
Yeah.
go out and do these professional developments for school systems? Do you come into schools virtually and in person? What are ways that you are shedding this light of artivism outside
Hmm.
of New York?
Yeah, well, it started out with word of mouth because once again, I just knew I learned differently. So I always want to say that that was the foundation. And once I started freelancing with a couple arts organizations, they quickly identified, I did stuff for like the public library, the Department of Education here. And then, like what happened in New York was a particular thing that got me to get into other states. We have a system which I think is terrible, where what was normally one large school, especially when the advent of charter schools came around, it became highly popular about a decade in education. I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the country. But what would happen is one school that was like a larger couple thousand thing would get broken up into like four schools housed in one building. So on one floor, it would be a different school, another floor. So as funny as it sounds, they would hear about it. These schools would share like facilities. So they would share like cafeteria and auditorium. So we would create some fire music, and then the other like assistant principal, like, what's going on over here? What's happening? And other teachers, teachers are like, they're like sports fans. Y'all are all together. So like they would start, hey, we got this thing, and this cat came in and did this. And eventually what that led to getting a little bit more international and national was I got asked to speak at educational conferences. So conferences that were aligned with educational reform, education considering social justice, also reform of music education, where a lot of these teachers were like, this stuff that I used to teach is not resonating with my youth, especially as time got further.
Yes.
So because they were looking for those models, and some of the organizations that I was freelancing with, they would just call me in and they're like, why can you come to the conference to model what you've been doing with our curriculum for a larger stuff? From principals to superintendents, they would catch a whiff. And then once you start dealing with a district, and then I started going to California, started going to them where they started supporting the arts a lot more after the tech boom. Internationally in places like, even with the UN, I had something nominated for a curriculum there, and sustainable development goals, where a lot of it has been around education reform and supporting. And, all educators are required to take PDs, professional development. And what happened is a lot of their PDs, for lack of a better term, are snoozers. They're just giving them something that's like, read this, implement this, we're doing this now, but the teachers weren't really getting tools. So I got blessed where some people who were impacted by the work I did asked me to come in and do some of these professional developments for groups of teachers. And once you give a teacher a tool that they can use in their classroom, they get so hungry. And they got hungry for it, and they started, so all credit due to them. They started spreading me to one organization to the next, and then it led from one thing to the other.
Well, I know just exploring your website is super inspiring and invigorating, just seeing what a diverse team you have at Creative Expressions and all of the different areas that you cover. You have MCs and beatboxers and theater people and hip hop people, and it's just such a cool community. How often do you get to be with your whole community? Do you have like staff meetings like traditional businesses, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's oh man, thank you again for that. It means so much because I'm thinking of how each of those implemented. Because what happened was when I started doing more formal things, I'd bring in a vocal coach, I'd bring in certain skills. I'm a good general person, but when I needed those specifics. So a nickname I used to give myself was General Specific, like a person going in with a real deep intention. So once I started to see what were the interests and the needs, especially of our youth of today, I realized like beatboxing was a big thing because they could internalize it. That correlates like the Suzuki method. If you're doing like a 4 to 4, if you get them to physically do that activity, and especially when I was working with special needs youth, where maybe they were dealing with some disabilities that did not allow them to, have sight and go to the computer and do this, or go to a drum and do it, I realized the body was the number one place where we internalize our rhythm, pitch, and all those things. So then I'd pick up that puzzle piece, right? And then the next thing came in. I do bi-weekly Artivist network and build sessions, which of course I can link you guys to. I'm updating them on my website, open to all artists, educators, or people who are curious. So bi-weekly, I do those things on there, and then I lock in and give myself that room. So, everybody's schedules is crazy. So every 2 weeks, I do have those sessions. I hold a group chat, and then, quarterly or so, I strive to do a gathering of everybody to come together at the music venues that we collaborate with. And then, I build a house band around it so they can also share their skills and do what they need to do.
All right, I'm going to plan my next trip to New York next time you have one of those. That would be
We've
so
got
fun.
one on the 20th, love. If you're here on the 20th, we got the spot, and it's open. It's open where, I curate it, but then anyone can come in, sit on an instrument, talk about it. And then I show some of the videos from Creative Expression and say, if you want to get more involved than just performing that, you can take this way. Of course, no offense to anybody who doesn't, but, we do it with a purpose.
I love that you've taken your exploration and your desire to change lives through the power of music education and all these other pieces. And you're just putting it out there. You're not just a music educator, you're an entrepreneur who owns his own business. I mean, that is just so cool to see.
Man, I don't have the skill that some people have to, like, some people can go and work, for other people. Some people can follow. And I suffered imposter syndrome a lot because I was just having so much problems, like acclimating to the way. And then I realized, wow, the same challenges and problems I have are what our youth have. Oh, they say, they're ADD. They don't want to focus on it. And I realized, I got it. I got it too. Let's work on it together. And I showed them the word I learned was transmogrification. And how do you take this thing that is looked at as a quote unquote flaw or something you might want to get rid of, and how do you use it to be an advantage, And I think the fact that, same thing, I grew up with family that dealt with like everything from mental health. My pops was diagnosed with schizophrenia and those things. So I grew up with that in my household, and it was just the way it was. So for me, it made me hyper attentive to other people's needs. It made me focus on understanding that people shouldn't be guilted or shamed for who they are. And, every time, I've done this work in psychiatric detention facilities and in detention centers, jails, and everything. And they're always giving me this credit, like, how are you able to make this connection? I said, well, back to two of these. I'm hyper attentive to what they come with, what their interests are. And then when you create something based on somebody, it's like I'm a chef. And I know if this person likes the vegan organic salad, I understand. This person wants the A1 steak sauce on this. I'm always humble to this, and I don't say anyone is better or worse. I just understand when you make a connection to something, you will tend to go deeper into it. So if I can create something that connects to their spirit, and my goal always as a facilitator and educator is, what are they going to take away when I am not there? Because I know a lot of people were overly classically trained. They were practicing for 12 years. They stopped for 2 years and it's all gone. I said, how is this possible? And I realized, oh, wow, you were put on a regiment. And when you stopped the regiment, it didn't resonate in with you and to keep it up. So I was like, wow, for me, I'm in this for life. So I had to look at ways that really connect to people when I am not there, which is also probably something that's unique about my approach. I'm always telling them, guys, what can you learn from this that you could teach to someone else? So when I teach bar counting or melodies or scales or whatnot, I go, do you have a deep enough understanding of this? Not so that you can do it, but that you can show it, which is hence the Cypher again.
That whole circle. And that's so important. That's such a thing we talk about. What happens when they're not in your choir anymore? They're not in your band. When they move from elementary school to middle school to high school to college, when they're done with college and they're adults, how are they still experiencing? It always makes me so sad when you hear someone say, I used to play. Or
that breaks my heart.
it hurts so bad.
You got it. You got it.
But you're changing that through, I love you have so many great quotes, the impact, educate, and empower. I can
Yeah,
see how you're empowering them. Do
that's
you
it.
then have them like teach each other? How do you make sure they can exist without you?
Yeah, so like everything, right? I'm a slow learner personally. You got to show me. My joke with all students is I say I have to get it wrong every possible way before I get it right. And that gave me a deep understanding because once again, I if I was in the student in the class, I'd be someone who would take a little bit longer to get it. And in a lot of music classes, it's almost I've even heard this like A B. They would go to a note, press the note, whether it's middle C on the keyboard. All right, if you can repeat this pitch exactly as it is, you're on this side. If you can't, this. But there's so many factors. Was the student nervous that day? Did it freak them out that they were going to this? Maybe they harmonized and they're inclined to do harmony. Like it's so deep where people are told this is right and this is wrong. And I think that's very traumatic. And what I started to do is really, really understand that no matter where you're at, music is about finding your voice. Music is about finding. That's why the world doesn't say, hey, we got 565 million piano players. We're good. We're good. No more piano players allowed, right? Because everyone can bring something unique to it. Master fundamentals. Then once you get that fundamental, it's like the rules to break the rules. So, when I have to, do certain things with the students, I always say, look, we're going to give you fundamentals. Once you show me that you're competent in these fundamentals, you can go to the moon and you can break all the rules. But let's just understand, like, let's get you to get this basic thing done. And a lot of what I'm doing is heavy emphasis on fundamentals, which, like, think of us as humans, right? We don't all start out running, right? In Olympic track. We stumble, we crawl, we walk, and then we run. And then we then can learn to drive a boat, fly a plane, you name it. Sky's the limit. But you can't skip steps. So whenever a student's like, I want to do this and this, I'm like, well, the fundamental of you being able to do that is you got to master these basic skills. So a lot of times I'm reinforcing a lot of fundamentals in them. And then once they get into the habit of internalizing those things where they understand it, then it's like a house. You have a strong foundation you can build upon. So really my work, and as we mentioned, is to create strong foundations that our youth can build. Sometimes us as educators, we only get to see a seed get planted into a sprout. We don't know that will become a giant oak tree years later. We don't get to see the results. But now that I got students from 10 plus years ago, they'll come back to me and they'll be like, why that thing we did back when I was in middle school changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I'm like, what was it? And then I'm able to hear back from them what worked and how it stood into their mind. Or they'd be like, hey, I didn't really understand why you did it. It's kind of like Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, right? Remember, he was throwing the kicks on the book, and then
yes,
the dude comes to fix his sink or something. He goes, oh, you learned from a book. And then he goes to him and says, come here, paint the fence, wax on, wax off. And then Danielson has that moment where he's angry. He's like, when are you going to show me some moves? All I'm doing is I'm cleaning your house, I'm cleaning your car. And then he has that moment, show me paint the fence. And it was like, I showed you this up, down, this is a block. This was this was that. And then the aha moment comes in. So once again, whatever we do is about mastering those fundamentals and bringing it into our bodies and ingraining that into somebody where it becomes a foundation that can be built upon.
I think what you've done so great, though, with creative expressions is creatively finding a bunch of different ways to teach those fundamentals. But what you're saying, too, is that you're remaining authentic to you.
Yeah.
And that's such a good reminder for anyone listening.
Be who you are. Yeah.
That's so good. Oh, I feel like we could talk ideas all day long, and I totally want to see you teach a whole big group of fundamentals I can't wait. I'm going to come like, hey, I'm here. Can I watch you do anything?
No, you're coming. We'll bring you in the fire. Participatory.
Oh my gosh, we'd have so much fun. We would blow up the room. Okay, well, I want to ask you some end of show wrap up questions and give you some opportunities to share a couple more things going on.
Yeah.
Related but not related, because you've given us a lot of great books. What's the best or most recent book that you've read?
Oh man, Gabor Mate is one of my favorite authors. He does a lot of work around developmental psychology. It's like kind of a habit of understanding the why of why I do what I do, because I get this credit for this thing and I'm kind of, it's like spinach in my teeth. People like, wow, you have this. I'm like, I couldn't really see it, but when I started looking into like my childhood, everything from good things to traumas, there's this book that I'm reading now by Gabor Mate called The Myth of Normal. And it's basically saying that no one is normal. Like when you take the term average, it means you grab a bunch of different things, add them up, and divide them by the number, right? So The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, I'm up to chapter 7 on Audible, listening to the audiobook of it. And I re-listened to it because it has a lot about understanding how like our fundamental years develop the basis for what we are. And as I keep evolving, I keep going back to these situations that made me what I am. And as I now help people understand it, because once again, I don't want them to be me. I want them to be themselves. I had to learn a deeper level of myself. So it's like Inception, you go a level deeper. So that is the current book I'm reading right now.
This sounds awesome. I've just
Myth of
written it
Normal.
down. I'll put it in the episode notes too.
Yeah.
Who or what is mattering to you right now or inspiring you right now?
Ooh, the next event I'm doing on the 20th is called Renew. This one is Renew. And a big thing is I also learned to empower other artists. And I've created a grant writing course, now to help artists, take care of what we need to. Because me as someone who does struggle with certain things and figuring out finances and this and that. So this really matters to me to build community that can thrive doing what we love. So for me, I do this Artivist training as well as the Don't Take It for Granted course, which are helping people who want to use their skills to serve community do so. Because, I came across the term Artivism. It was around in the 60s, I believe it originated during like, the hippie movement and those things. And I realized, wow, it is a tool. So yeah, that matters a lot to me for this to be sustainable and grow beyond me. So the grant writing course and the Artivist training, which is now what I offer other people, because once again, I meet other people that are like, they think I'm like a miracle that lightning struck on me and I was made this way, but it was a long time that I developed the skills. So it does matter to me to be able to pay it forward. And the same way I used to help youth to be able to help empower, like you said, impact, educate, and empower. So that's really probably one of the more important things. And to keep growing as an artist and as a person, first and foremost.
Okay, so the Renew event and the Don't Take It for Granted. That's an awesome title, by the way. Very creative.
Thank you.
I hope you're going to talk about why not show love for this next question, but
Yeah,
you don't have to.
I
What is
will.
an organization that matters to you right now?
Yeah, so I just started saying show love a lot. Like people are like, well, why do you do this? So we'll give love to get love, right? And then I was looking for a website and things, and I ended up creating, the mantra that I kind of use is why not show love. I found it on all platforms. I got the .com through the grace of whatever luck I had. And that's what I ended up building, like a production company. We call ourselves Show Love Productions. And this is how we produce the events, how I put out my own art in a way that is still following that circular model of creative expression. So I have a story that goes with it where when I was teaching at one organization, they said, why you're one of our best facilitators. What do you need to work with us more? When I was bouncing around all the boroughs in this. I said, guys, instead of sending me to all these places, why don't you put me in one place more often? And for 4 years, I started with a 9th grade class and went with them throughout, their high school 4 years.
Cool.
And at the end of that graduation ceremony, I was so touched because, I taught them everything I know. We went from beginning with just pens and papers, and we ended up doing full band, original compositions, everything. And at the end of the graduation speech, a couple of the seniors, they riled me up in the back. It was very emotional graduation event. And I was like, I'll be back next year, guys. And they wrote me this letter that was like, why? We think you need to take your own advice and you need to be more of what you said. And like, I burst into tears and I was like, well, I found my identity through education and through my work because, once again, I never felt like going the traditional route. But they told me, my own students were like, you need to create something that you are doing what you're telling us to do. And I just was like a faucet. I was like, I was like, I got to do this. So that's when I ended up starting, Why Not Show Love? And then being like, this is how I'm going to collaborate, how I make my own music, how I compose and do those things. So I just became like a student of myself, but that was 100% due in 2016 to that graduating class that basically told me I have to practice what I am teaching them in my own life. They they checked me in a good way. And now they made me more of an artist, which is understanding that this is my method, but I have a unique way of mixing my left brain and my right brain to creating that Venn diagram, that allows me to do that. So both those things coexist. It's like my left hand and my right hand coming together to, say my prayer, so that's what it is. Awesome. And once again, we do community-based events at least every month, partnered with venues. And then now I've been producing my own stuff. And as the company gets bigger and Creative Expressions gets taken over by the new facilitators that are continuing teaching me, I am now able to evolve as in my own career as an artist. So that's what Why Not Show Love is all about. Practicing the same things that I told youth they could do, that they could be anything they want in this world. And yep.
Now you're doing it. That's so cool. All right. I'll make sure to link Creative Expressions and Why Not Show Love in the episode notes.
Thank you
so much. Only have one more question. And I'm like, this time has flown by
like
talking
grease
with
lightning.
you. Holy smokes. What is the thing that matters? What's the message you want to send out to the world?
Couple things that I've stated, I'll reinforce. It's like, always be a student, always keep the clay malleable. Don't ever feel like, you're there. Just when you climb one mountain, there's another. And, it is, I use the word love a lot, but I also want to mention that love is one of the most hard things, right? Anyone knows that we all love music, and you'd be up all night and a piece is kicking your behind, and you'll cry and you're it lets out all your emotions. So, show that love, give love and get the love, and use the love, do what you love, so it pushes you and propels you. So life is going to always give you challenges. So at least if you know your purpose and your intention, those are two things. That's why I go by why, really, to remind myself, why are you doing what you're doing? What's the point? What's the purpose? One of my jazz mentors taught me this. When I told him I only know these couple chords, he said, well, can you put your whole entire being behind that chord, that one note, that one? And that always resonated with me, that as they say in cooking, put your foot in it, get in there and make it, put your soul stain on anything you do, whether it's a conversation, and always know that you are one of one. We were all created by a creator to create. So you have a unique caveat, and those same awkward things that made me a shy kid that didn't fit in, couldn't fit into most structures academically, is the same reason that I have whatever degree of success I have now. The same thing that I thought I was cursed with is my blessing. So, really look at those things that come naturally to you. And if you love it, make it your living, and the universe will meet you halfway. If you show up, it will start to come toward you. And it's possible for anyone at any stage in life if you keep the clay wet and keep a student.
Why, you have been so inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And I can't wait to watch more of what happens with Creative Expressions and Why Not Show Love.
Right. When you come down to New York, you hit me up. We got the bomb food in Astoria. We'll figure out something. And there's great events if you happen to be here during the event. We're also doing a women's self-defense class. So a lot of things are changing where we're holistically approaching and using the art as a tool. Thank you for holding space for me. And I appreciate you from the depths of my spirit for having me.
I don't know about you, but I am so ready to also become an artivist, an interdisciplinary artivist, as Y says. I love that we got to talk about not just teaching techniques and ideas and sequencing, but also that Cypher-based pedagogy where you actually work in that circle, assessing and building and listening more than you speak. I also loved Y's definition of music, that music in and of itself is tension and release, and that it's all about presenting the fundamentals in as many modalities as possible, because it's how do you take what they are bringing to the table and make it awesome? That transmodification, where something that might be seen as negative is actually used for the positive. There's so many great quotes on this one, and I hope that you have been inspired by Y's story. I know that it was really a joy to talk to him, and the conversation flew by. All right. Take a second, like and review. That's really helpful. If you want to support the podcast, patreon.com/musicedmatters. But really, the thing that really matters is you, my friend. You matter. We all know that music matters, especially how we are building community through creative expression and, as Y says, impact, educate, and empower. I hope that you have enjoyed this, and I will see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.